Good morning, my time. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where others are situated. My name is Kevin Simpson, founder of ALOC, or the Association of International Educators and Leaders of Color. I will start by acknowledging that I'm currently based in Dallas, which is on stolen land. It's the land of the Cattle, the Kickapoo, the Comanche, and the Wichita. And again, that's a part of that acknowledgement of the history, her history and their history of the people in terms of where I am currently located. Turn over to Meredith to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you. I'm Meredith. I'm currently working at UNIS Hanoi in Vietnam, a country that has over 20 indigenous communities that are still thriving, alive, and well. And it's great to be with you all. And Kevin and I are really excited to share with you the update of our accreditation task force.
Awesome. Thanks, Meredith. And we'll start by saying we acknowledge and know that education is political. We acknowledge that changes have occurred that impact our schools, that impact us. But we also want to say that Meredith and the four organizations that are affiliated with the task force, I'll just slide that back one. Give me a second to slide it back. ALOC, ECIS, ACLIN, IB, wanted to honor the scholars, the teachers, the educators, the leaders in the organizations who started this work in 2022. And for us is to make sure that all of us that are on here, and we encourage others who've been impacted in some way, shape, or form to make sure that we're engaging in spaces and places to stay up to date, to ask questions, but also, you know, the main thing, as Meredith and I were saying earlier, and as Cam and all of us have talked about, is to know that we all know what's possible, regardless of language, regardless of what is used, what's possible in our ecosystem. And we know we want what's best. We know what scholars said years ago. And so we're keeping that at the forefront of this work, any other work that we do. So turn over to Meredith.
Thanks, Kevin. So today we're going to start off by going over the mission of the Accreditation Task Force, the accreditation group, a part of the task force, and we're going to honor the committee members that were a part of this group. We're going to break down the 3 recommendations that the task force is focusing on for all accreditation agencies. We're going to sample the framework and protocol of one particular organization and let that be an example of what we're hoping other organizations strive towards as ways to adopt these recommendations. And then we'll have time for a Q&A at the end.
Brilliant. Others, if you're just joining us, welcome Dr. Jatinder of India with IB. Just hop in the chat, let us know where you're joining us from. Real quickly, and we purposely left Nunana on here. Nunana was a huge champion of our committee. So we want to make sure we acknowledge Nunana Naomi, who's now working in leadership at ACLIN, which is one of the 4 partners. So we want to make sure we acknowledge him, say his name, say thank you to him, but also keep his name as a part of the work that was started. So the mission statement, I'll just read here, is we're committed to an accreditation process that's transparent, free from fear, where individuals will participate authentically, and our schools will grow in their ability to foster a culture of dignity and respect. We envisage a future where accreditation is an integral part of eliminating discrimination in this international school ecosystem. Our goal is to make recommendations to all accrediting agencies in order to use their power to help make and sustain necessary strategies for international schools. So that gives that overall big picture. Welcome, Irina, as well, based in China, of the why we exist and the focus of the work that we're engaging in. Over to Meredith.
So we want to honor, acknowledge, and thank all the people who were part of this committee, as is the kind of dream we have for what accreditation teams would look like. Our team was very diverse, represented a range of educators who hold, again, really diverse roles and experiences in international schools, and that really helped to contribute to make our task force very productive. We worked great together, and we're very thankful for everyone's time and input. We also had an advisory group that gave us feedback throughout the entire process and the revision process. And so again, thank you all for your time and your thoughts and your advice.
We also want to acknowledge the accreditation organizations who served in giving feedback, who served on the teams, who were very right on the side of us, saying that these are things that could be done right now. We don't have to wait. And so we want to acknowledge NEOS, Council of International Schools, WASC, and ICASA. And if you've seen like an accreditation org that's not here, we do want to let you know that we invited everybody. So everybody was invited. There was never a time where we didn't say who's not here, who's not at the table, who do we need to make sure we invite in. And so that's part of the work that we still feel that we need to continue to do, that outreach to folks and let them know that this is a collaboration, it's a partnership, it is an open space. We want to make sure that folks know and are aware of that. But these are the 4 that were consistent from the beginning. And we want to, again, make sure that we acknowledge them and say thank you to them for being a part of the work that we're involved in.
So as Kevin said to start off, we need to, while not diminishing and not dismissing the challenges that are happening, we also need to not lose sight of the dreams that we have for what we want the future to be like for accreditation, and how we want this truly to not just be something of compliance, but to be something that can drive change. And so working with these accreditation organizations and being a part of this task force, we really do believe and care that this work happens, because this is what trickles down to affect the cultures of schools. And so I'd like to honor, because these dreams all came from a range of the community members. I'd like to honor them by reading what people are hoping for. So our dreams are that every accreditation agency has clearly defined anti-discrimination standards, that accreditation is a transparent process that decenters leaders, that accreditation is student-led, that accreditation is not viewed as compliance, but as an opportunity to community, that accreditation is viewed as an educational opportunity for the community to learn about itself, that accreditation frameworks are intentional about creating a culture of respect and learning, that accreditation team evaluators are more representative, that people can participate in accreditation authentically without fear of negative repercussions, and that a culture of dignity and respect become an overarching lens, that the foundation for accountability across all aspects of school life. Back to Kevin.
So those were the dreams of our committee. But we want to give you time and a chance to pause and allow you some time and space to dream. What are your dreams as it relates to accreditation? We've all been involved in some way, shape, or form, whether you've been part of a visiting team, you've been a chair of accreditation, you've been part of a task at your school or institution connected to accreditation. So we're going to pause for a moment and give you a chance just to in chat to respond to what would you say would be one of your dreams as it relates to accreditation. And we'll look for those and then we'll read those. Welcome, Sassy. See you in Vietnam. Thanks for hopping on. Thanks, Nayong. She said that my dream for accreditation is to foster a culture of courageous accountability, one where transparency, reflection, and responsibility are embedded in our practices. Go ahead, want to play tennis, Meredith? You want to take that second one?
Sure. John, hi, John, good to see you. So John writes, all accreditation standards be public to ensure all community members can easily access all accreditation standards to hold leadership accountable. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. I dream of accreditation orgs using their guidance to build LGBTQ+ safety and belonging with schools worldwide.
Hi, Cam. Cam writes, you cannot get accreditation unless you can demonstrate inclusion in action throughout the school. And it is deeply embedded and not an afterthought. Thank you, Cam.
Thanks, Jane, that the accreditation process is valued and used as a means to gather and include all voices across the school community on its future path.
Thanks, Taylor, for saying accountability and opportunity for courageous conversations.
Thanks, Remy. I like this list. I would add the right to be accredited in another language than English.
I think I just skipped one. Oh, thanks. Hi, Anne. Anne says, all schools must have a strategic plan for how they will implement anti-discrimination standards. Whoop, I just missed one. Thank you. Implement anti-discrimination standards and practices that includes ongoing monitoring and evaluation. Thank you.
I'll take those next. So Irina says authentic community engagement. Remy says beautiful proposal. I love them. I'll take Davis too, and you take Juan's, Meredith. I'll do the fine. David says all leaders have the opportunity to show their accountability on what they are doing to support inclusion and belonging.
All right, my friend Juan, here I go. I'm gonna quote you now. Accreditation is not just a stamp of approval. It is a testament to our commitment to excellence and continuing improvement. It reflects our dedication to nurturing an environment where every student is empowered to dream, learn, and grow. Together, we are building a legacy of knowledge and integrity, paving the way for future generations to thrive and make a positive impact on the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Omalola. Build effective leadership, teams, and governance structures that support long-term success. I'll hop in here and get Rachel's too. Rachel says accreditation agencies measure the extent to which DEIJ principles are embedded into school policies, curriculum, hiring, and decision-making. All right. We appreciate dreamers. Anyone else? There's Ceci. Grab Ceci.
I got sassy. That the accreditation process centers the multilingual, multicultural, and diverse populations of international school communities, and that it guides the foundational pedagogical practices. Thank you, Ceci.
Right. We want to say thank you to all of you dreamers who are on here as well. And again, we know it's not just words, it also takes, as a lot of folks says, action and continued action and continue to being engaged in a state of just learning and growth. That the accreditations that we went through years ago, knowing that they're going to change and they're going to consistently change. And so thinking about how we could be part of that process. So we thank you all for taking some time in a moment just to dream with what's possible. So let's move on to what the dreamers who are part of this committee talked about. And we'll call this one of my favorite shows. Talk about a show that had me in tears every time I watched almost, because the writers were amazing. This Is Us. So This Is Us, part of the family, called it the Big Three. So we're going to call this our Big Three. So I'll start with the first one, Meredith, take the second, and then we'll move on to the third. First recommendation. Number one, that accreditation agencies provide guidance and training for schools to make the process in and of itself more inclusive. Big objective is to help school communities make a commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and belonging through an inclusive and aspirational accreditation process. So what does that mean? That means such things such as clarifying and developing guidance on how our communities can engage in the process to implement full inclusion and transparency. That means thinking about how do you prepare for visits, who's involved, is it heavily leadership involved? Where are the voices of our students and scholars? Making sure that every family, every student has an opportunity to be involved in some way, shape, or form, that their voices are consistently centered. And also at the same time, fulfilling DEIJ responsibilities within their school context. That means reviewing community surveys. I'll say that again, reviewing community surveys, because we know about community surveys and that transparency is there, whether there are things that some people don't want to hear, that we actually are listening to what feedback is given, any type of meetings that they're recorded, that those notes, again, there's transparency about it, around all kinds of things when it comes to data, And we think about things such as case studies being developed. But again, making sure when it comes to the community that it is fully transparent, it is fully involving everyone, not certain folks, but everyone has an opportunity to voice their opinions and say sort of the state of the school where it's at, but also where we need to be. So that is recommendation number 1.
All right, so recommendation 2, build diversity and capacity of accreditation staff and volunteers to assess DEIJB. So the objective with that is to diversify the pool of accreditation team evaluators and strengthen their ability to assess DEIJB. So then what does that mean? Well, one, we don't need accreditation teams to only be, white dominant educators. We need to have diverse teams who represent and reflect the school communities around the world in which we all are involved with. And so those teams must be diversified. That also means that we want schools to not only encourage a range of their staff to apply to be able to go through the training to be an accreditor, but we want schools to then give release time for people to go through those trainings. So it's not just that the teams are diverse, but we want schools to say, we value this too, so we're going to ensure that people have release time to go through those trainings. We want to develop evaluation training to include those competencies that would be assessed. So we want all people, like regardless of experience, we want accrediting teams to be able to assess DEIJB standards and competencies when they are on these accrediting visits. So very similar to a lot of the dreams that people shared. We want that to be true too. And that means we also want to encourage both the agencies and their accrediting educators to participate in ongoing education of themselves, to be able to keep up with and evolve and make sure they are doing best practices and not just the status quo.
Finally, the last of our big 3, recommendation number 3, that accreditation agencies to strengthen DEIJ expectations within accreditation standards for school communities. And this is every accreditation agency has clearly defined anti-discrimination standards which school communities can commit and aspire to achieve. So what does that mean? It means looking at things such as the role and responsibilities of the DEIJB leader at the school, the need for regular DEIJB competency training for all staff at the school. It means adopting core standards relative to DEIJB and anti-discrimination across all the different school accreditation agencies. It's holding space and time to review and reflect, expand, and evaluate current standards related to safeguarding, to well-being, to ensure that we include references to DEIJB and anti-discrimination, and that agencies use the task force to provide any type of input and feedback to the organizations as those standards and indicators have been developed. So that's our 1, 2, 3. We'll give you
Sorry, Kevin, could I just say, John just put a comment in the chat that I think is really important and relevant, if you don't mind me drawing attention to it. John's talking about the need to secure anonymous feedback and why that's so relevant. Couldn't agree more, John. And I think we were hoping that either with recommendation 1 or 3, depending on the making the entire process more inclusive, and also accreditation agencies strengthening their expectations, those two, that would be a part of the process for community members so that they have that outlet. Could not agree more how important that is. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you, Meredith, for saying that. So those are our big 3. We'll give you all the opportunity to reflect, think about, and just time to react and respond. And again, if you want to come off unmute and raise your hand, or if you want to in the chat say. So as you think about those, what's your response? Listen to those big 3.
Hi, it's Brenda from Canada, although I'm not in Canada right now. Um, my what I'm thinking about is the idea of training teams who are going in and to visit schools. And while we address pluralism in schools, I I would love some thoughts and direction on how to train teams in this area because it's such a huge area. And while we obviously do some team training, I think we can adjust it. So any guidance on that, I'd appreciate.
Thanks, Brenda. Yeah, that's definitely a good one. And part of I think that training too is when it comes to and the great part of this was that ICASA, Bonnie was a part, and so not seeing sort of like your organization have to do it alone. So part of it we want to be thinking about that knowledge share across. So looking and seeing and how we can pull, because I know I've seen some things that NEAS have been offering around like just
Brilliant, yes.
cultural competence. And then, so I think part of it is going to be like just pulling together and sort of saying, who are some organizations, individuals, institutions we've been collaborating with that we can pull together. So, and that's definitely something that, we can recommend. Yeah, there's a couple of comments. John said, I think recommendation 3 and all identity harm is also covered by existing FCP. I think that's the International Task Force for Child Protection, child safeguarding standards. So thanks, John, for making that connection over as well. See, thanks, Nayan. Read this. Nayan agrees with John. During accreditation preparation training from Qatar, they emphasized that if someone shares a grievance with us, we should report it immediately without taking any further action ourselves. While I understand the intent, I also feel this highlights a potential gap. If people feel the need to confide in individuals rather than using formal channels, it might indicate that the school needs a more effective and trusted reporting system rather than one that simply silences concerns and potentially enables leaders who may not be truly listening. Thank you, Nayan.
And to add on to Young in terms of that aspect of when we do accreditation, how transparent is the process with its data? Because at times, I'm going to be honest, and I'm going to say it here, we work data to suit the accreditation. And so that honesty with data is something that how do we ensure the integrity of the data as a accreditation organization as well as the school.
Thanks, Juan, bringing that piece up. And that's, going back to why I said those community surveys and making sure that again, it shouldn't be, let me pick this scholar and this parent. No, pick the parent that is going to question and is going to always be involved, and the one that's going to be challenging. So I think, make sure that it's a well-represented group of individuals who are invited, into the process as well. But it should be open for all. I mean, I've seen where it's like, yep, we're going to pick them. They're the well-spoken scholar that we want to represent the school. It's like, have a range, and going back to some of the things that Ceci and others as well. Think about like our all of our different types of languages that are in our institutions. So how is that represented in the surveys, as well as in the representation on those different committees as well?
Yeah, and I agree with Juan where the data can be, to use to the school's advantage. But one way that we can kind of help that is just like any other research is using more than one form. So not just surveys, but combining qualitative and quantitative data. So one of the best ways is focus groups too. So use more than one form of data. So that will help the validation. And then I was also, before Juan spoke, going to just say that there's many areas, for instance, recruitment's one of them, where there's no accountability with most of these schools as far as what they're doing for anti-discrimination standards, where they're not collecting any data, as opposed to corporations and companies, which now for several years have been required to, many of them, collect data in that. So I think that's something that should be part of that accreditation is in certain areas where they're not collecting data, I think they should have to collect data to show that they're implementing and at least attempting to make some progress in it, you know, in all the areas that this task force has looked at.
Thank you, Ann. And Ann is serving on the, I think it's the HR, who's like shifted from recruitment to HR committee as well. Jane, good morning, good afternoon, good to see you.
Hi, Kevin. We're in the same time zone. I'm really happy to be here and see this move forward, particularly given everything that's happening this month when, our voices couldn't be more important. And I just wanted to add for everyone that, we do as accreditors get together, and not just accrediting agencies, but also with other agencies or organizations, I should say, that evaluate how well their programs are implemented and their impact, like the IB. And one of the things, because we do all talk together quite a bit, and in fact, we're meeting together this week in Tennessee because it's just before the National Association of Independent Schools conference. And so there are a lot of smaller independent school accreditors here in the US who come to that conference. And so we're having it as an opportunity to have the ICASA Council meeting. And this is going to be a big topic, particularly this month, because one of the questions we have to carefully think about is what will be the impact of the strengthened scrutiny and regulatory environment around the ability to even use words related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's an important question for us all to consider together. And so we are. And no one wants to compromise their values around this either. At the same time, we really don't want people to be harmed or even prosecuted or lose funding, for any of this. So how do we really figure out a way to make sure that everything we do and that we will do in the future, we can continue to do, or maybe I should more appropriately say that schools can access them. If you understand what I'm saying, I'm sure. So this is the time to use our voices and make sure that, it is not a time to be silent. Let's put it that way, because I think being silent is the biggest risk right now. And so in the spirit of everyone who's talking about how to become even more inclusive through the accreditation process, I just wanted to say, I also think that we have another very exciting opportunity right now with technology, because one thing that this task force uncovered is that a lot of voices have been marginalized because of a lack of language ability in English. Well, with the tools we have now, that shouldn't be an issue any longer. There's so many ways that we're also considering how to use AI in the process to help it be more inclusive for speakers of other languages. English fluency won't be as important in the future, I believe. And simultaneously, there are other accreditors who work with universities, higher education accreditation. They have just come out with new guiding principles and ethics for using generative AI in the accreditation process. And, we noticed immediately, again, none of this work should be done in silos, right? If a student is in a university environment that is guided by certain principles and practices, we need to be, that we don't want them to have an awkward shift to one environment from the school environment, whatever those principles might be. So we also have to talk together all the time about how we're going to apply in a uniform way these ethics and principles. So I just wanted to take us, to that very high level for a moment to really think deeply about this very difficult environment we're in right now and where we're all going to go forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Jane. And thank you again for the importance of, knowledge sharing as well as awareness. And again, like I brought up here, it's not a time to be silent. So it's not time to sit on the wayside and try to figure out that everyone should be active in making sure that wherever we're at, as Emily said, we appreciate you, Jane, for your leadership and, being grateful To you, thank you, Brenda, for being here. Folks that are right, in accreditation. And I've been to the CASA piece before. Bonnie invited me, invited us, Nunana as well. Again, we're grateful for that and for your voice. And again, bringing up that, as we said before, it's about learning, and I think keeping that stance on learning and honoring, people, honoring the work is very important. I'm gonna hit Meredith a couple things in the chat, and then we'll press on. Rachel says, speaking of data, it'd be great if accreditation agencies required schools to track student success data disaggregated by various factors such as race, gender, disability, socioeconomic status, language background to identify and address any inequities. Let's see. Then Meredith, you want to take Ceci?
Yes, and Ceci's, I think, kind of building off of that discussion regarding data collection. I agree with Anne that we should explore diverse methods of gathering data while also considering the cultural context of each school community, pardon me. Being thoughtful about how data collection tools are utilized, as well as ensuring clarity around the purpose of the data, can help ensure that the information gathered is both reliable and authentic within each unique school context. Additionally, it is essential to make the data linguistically accessible to all and to approach data analysis with accuracy and cultural sensitivity. Thank you, Ceci.
Thank you, Ceci. And another
And
colleague.
I think we missed one comment. Sorry, John had another comment in regards to our to recommendation 3. Kevin, do you see that? John wrote that recommendation 3 and all identity harm is also covered by existing child safeguarding standards. Yes, and we're hoping that this goes sort of beyond that. So thinking back to some of the comments people made about like their dreams and having things being very explicitly tied to DEIJB standards with regard to policy, curriculum, not all agencies have that. And so the hope is that there would be expectations across all aspects and facets of an accreditation process that schools would then have to be accountable for, and that teams would be responsible and be skilled at assessing.
And there's another one. I had a comment that was sent that said, thinking about leadership experience. So think about the new leaders who are new, maybe 0 to 2 years, who are getting into accreditation for the first time leading that. Think about their experiences, where they're at. Again, thinking about like when it comes to community surveys, collecting data. So again, that going back to that disaggregating data based on experience. That's another one to think about. We appreciate you all. All right, I'm gonna turn over to Meredith. That's gonna highlight an example of the work that's already being started from CIS.
Right. So Jane, it's extra great that you're here just because we can highlight some of the work that CIS is doing as a way to show how one organization has taken these recommendations, taken it to the context of their organization, and then implemented them really to push for change. Again, like it's really powerful because CIS accredits so many schools from such a range of backgrounds. So one, really want to highlight the fact that, and I'll apologize now, getting all of this really important text onto one slide was a challenge. Like this was not my skill set. So there's a lot to read. And so I encourage you all, if you have time, just to really take the time to dig through the thoughtful work that CIS has done and is doing. So we, as a task force, really appreciated this very clearly articulated and transparent guiding statements piece of their work, just as a way to say, not only are we taking these recommendations, but here's how it's going to guide our entire organization. And this idea of responsible leadership. And I've seen, lots of posts on LinkedIn of people even starting to hashtag that phrase, because it's really essential that these organizations, with the power that they have, push that to be something that's driving this work, is responsible, ethical leadership, which Jane is embodying for all of us right now. So you can take a look and see how CIS has broken down their mission and vision, their code of ethics, and their organizational values, and how that just frames the entire process for accreditation. If I can go to the next slide, Kevin, if that could be all right. So then we were also really impressed that CIS took the 3 recommendations and actually said, okay, great, we're going to apply that to our work, our institution, and here's how this would live with us. And so with regard to our first recommendation, and I'll just read the top part out, it's the process of fostering more inclusive practices. This is the guidance for schools on the international accreditation process fosters an inclusive approach in which a broad range of roles and individuals take leadership of the school's development initiatives. And then you can see a number of guidance points for what this means for schools in this with this particular recommendation. Again, really thoughtful and articulate and clearly linked to what we want this recommendation to be. Next slide. I'll just try to go quickly because there might be some time for questions and answers. For recommendation 2, the idea to building diversity and capacity among volunteers. CIS breaking down again 3 very specific things they're going to do and are doing actively to ensure that their teams are diverse. Just really appreciate this being thoughtful and that it's being intentional and not just tokenistic. And third recommendation that CIS has taken on, again, really sorry about the small font, everybody, but this idea of having a framework that strengthens socially responsible leadership practices. There is that accountability and there is that sort of loop of leadership back to how this work can really be authentic. And so, again, a lot of the bullet points that are included here are things that were specifically tied to what our discussions at a task force were. So we just really wanted to highlight one organization. We know that others have different constraints in different communities, but we just felt like CIS's response was so thoughtful and so tied specifically to our recommendations that we wanted to really highlight as an example of really taking this on.
Thanks, Meredith. All right. We're going to hold some space for any questions, Q&As folks may have. Think about our next steps. And we also have Cam is here as well. Michelle is here as well. So some other folks from the task force. So any other questions that you may have as we get ready to close out. So anything else on our minds? Yes, Cam, I see you.
Hello. I'd like to commend CIS on that work. It's absolutely brilliant. And it's just how accreditation agencies need to be showing up in schools. Jane, is that also NEASC? Have they done the same thing, do you know? Because I know you do some joint accreditations.
Thanks, Cam. Yeah, for those wondering, so we have an MOU with NEASC, Middle States, and WASC that when a school requests accreditation from more than one agency, 2 agencies, that they'll use the international framework if it's going to be a truly joint process. I just want to clarify that there are many misunderstandings around that. Some people think it's like a 2-for-1. It isn't. Schools have to decide how they want to be accredited, and therefore they need to register with each agency. If they want multiple accreditations, they have to register with each agency separately, because joint or dual accreditation and evaluation, for example, I'll get into that in a minute, it's not a product, it's a service. The school decides what agencies it wants to work with, tells us, and then as a service to the school, we find a way to work together. So we do that through the use of an MOU, where we then as agencies agree what framework to use. So once again, the CIS framework is then the one that's used for those processes. I can't comment on what they do when they accredit individually. You know, if they were here, I'm sure they would love to tell you all about that. I also want to just make a quick comment about MSA because they weren't referenced in the slide and they're not here. It's just a fact that when this task force was formed, Middle States was going through a leadership change. They, in fact, didn't have an executive director. They had a temporary one for over a year and didn't have the capacity, I think, at that point to engage because they were doing other things. I know the president of MSA very well, and I just want to add that MSA is equally as committed to these things as you've directly heard on this task force from NEASC and from WASC. And certainly we all work collaboratively with the IB as well when the IB is doing program evaluation. So just reassurance that we do all talk together about these things all the time. So I hope that's helpful, Cam.
Yes, it is. It's very helpful. And, you know, perhaps, like you said, you can't confirm for the other agencies. Perhaps we can reach out to them and see what, you know, what they provide in the same framework. Over to my wonderful colleague, Michelle. Thank you, Jane.
Well, thank you, Cam, and thank you so much, Kevin and Meredith, and for the work of this committee in really bringing about very practical ways of looking at accreditation procedures. And this is so important. And I wanted to kind of underscore some of the things that Jane, as well as Meredith and Kevin, have shared, particularly around the at least for some schools, some of the difficult periods that they might be experiencing, particularly around certain administrations, you know, having them to really look at the words that they use: diversity, equity, and inclusion, diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, or belonging. And I really appreciated, Jane, what you said about not getting hung up on the letters. Because from the start, we've all understood that it's really about doing the work. From the kickstart that we had in October 2022, it was all about how do we fully integrate inclusivity and inclusive practices in terms of the things that we do within our organizations. And sometimes we do get hung up on the words and the acronyms and feel like this is what we can stand on. It's really not. What we really can stand on is what we do internally to really advance belonging and inclusivity. And I think that you all, in underscoring this, it's just phenomenal, because I think that's the encouragement that schools need wherever they are, to really think about, okay, how do we practice this in terms of our policies and procedures? Because once you have it in terms of the policies and procedures within your school, then it can be implemented in terms of actual practice. And at least it's a guidepost, right? Sometimes it doesn't get fully implemented, but at least it's a guidepost for people to think about. Let's really think about integrating this throughout the school environment. So thank you so much for all of the effort that you've put in, Accreditation Committee, and for all of the insights that you've provided. And I have to say, Jane has been really wonderful about sharing reports and guidances from CIS with us. And we are very much inspired by that and use that to kind of help guide some of our frameworks as well. So thank you to all of you for your work.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Cam. Come on, Emily.
Hi, all. Clearly a lot went into making this happen, so thank you for the work and for sharing it out with us. I'm curious, specifically, you know, the work that I do is around LGBTQ safety and belonging. And I have met with people who will do DEI work, whatever we want to call it, and we'll focus on certain identities, but will skirt around anything to do with gender and sexual identity. I'm wondering if there's anything in here that sort of points people in the direction, or asks at least the question, to be clear that inclusion work isn't only about anti-racism, but looks at a range of identity markers.
Yep, definitely. And that piece on, you know, going back from our mission to each of those pieces around that, it's for all, ALL. So, and that's the big piece. And again, thinking around child safeguarding, because that was sort of the place that we sort of looked to see at the same time, the work that you all been doing with identity-based harm. So we took all of that into consideration. So when we say all, we're talking about ALL. And that's teachers, leaders, scholars, community members, parents. Yeah, exactly.
Kevin, I wanted to point out, John asked a question. Oh, there's everybody. I want to point out, John asked a question about how does this work carry over into the job search agency practices? Well, I'll back up. When the task force was formed, there are, is it 6 or 7 different groups that are a part of this International Schools Anti-Discrimination Task Force. One particular group is focused on recruitment, and they are the committee that is working directly with the recruitment agencies. So parallel to what we're doing, they're focusing on the recruitment agencies. So it's all related, and we've discussed, like, across those of us who are facilitating these different groups, how all of our work is now starting to really overlap. Right. So, for example, how is the humanizing pedagogy group that Anjali and Al present about recently? How is that sort of work overlapping with accreditation when schools have to demonstrate their curriculum, their unit guides? So there's overlap for sure, but our particular task force at this point hasn't addressed that because there's another group that is. So I hope that clarifies. It's not ignored, it's just somebody else.
If I may, Meredith, that would be us. That would be so. In April 2025, our committee will be sharing the insights from the guidance document that we've posted on the ISAD TF website. And I hope you all have that information. There are all of at least the three guidance documents that have already been completed are on the website. So we'll put it in the chat so you all can go and get it. But at the same time, we'll be talking about it in April.
Thanks.
There's one more question that came in. It says, can agencies recommend that there be a director of education for the schools that engages directly with stakeholders and reports to the head of school and governors and agencies? Data from and multiple data collection tools, including focus groups that take the message from those sustaining harm to the accreditation body and top level decision makings. Go ahead, Jane.
It's a really important question. So what does that look like in practice? So everyone has a complaints policy or a place to, I think, schools, institutions, and so do we as associations and accrediting bodies. One of the things that I'll just say is that, everything gets read. And what we do is the first thing is that if somebody reports an issue, the first thing we do is ask if we have permission to share their name with the school. And we assume that if they're coming to us, that they've already approached everyone at the school or have exhausted all avenues to report directly within the school community. Because I think we all know whenever something bad happens, it's always better that the person impacted works directly with those who have caused them harm directly, if it's safe to do so. Now, if it isn't safe to do so, that's when you have law enforcement agencies and others out there as well. But as an accrediting body, what can we actually do about that if they want to stay anonymous? Well, then what we do is we go back to the institution and we will either on a known basis or on an anonymous basis share that we've received a complaint. And to the best of our ability, we try to determine if that complaint is indicative of systemic abuse across the institution. In other words, is this an isolated case? Why is it happening? Is anyone still at risk of harm? Or is this something more broadly that's happening at the institution? if it is, if we are able to find out that it's something that is happening across the whole institution, then generally there are outcomes related to the loss of accreditation, and in CIS's case, also membership. But I'll just add that accreditation is a voluntary process for a school. It's not mandated by any government in an international school. There are more and more governments that are recognizing international accreditation, and some of them are actually accepting that in lieu of their own national form of quality assurance or accreditation, but that isn't common across the world. So all I'm going to just close by saying is that it's not only complicated, but complex when a complaint goes up to the level of an accreditor, and all of us have to have very, very thoughtful and serious processes in place to examine when we need to get involved and when it's not right for us to be involved. I hope that's useful.
Thanks, Jane. All right, good people. If there are no other questions, we appreciate y'all. Thank y'all for being here and knowing that the work that we continually do, which is connected and related to story. I forgot who said it. Someone said it. Someone said it. Was it Emily? Someone said it. I heard the word story. I think it's very important to think around story. And when 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, wherever we'll be in the world, just thinking back on the story of the international school ecosystem and where it was, where it is, and where it can be, and to know that you're part of the can be, the future, the dreams of it. And so, and I think bottom line is we know, we're aware, whether we're still heavily involved in some way, shape, or form, or if we've, left and, returned, or, whatever work we're doing. It's important to think about the story. And like I said, for us, we always come back to the why of the work that we do. And I'm very intentional in saying the why of the work that I'm doing is because of community, it's because of the scholars who we serve. And it's just making sure that that's continually centered. Don't do it for awards. Don't even do it for money. A lot of people forget, a lot of the work we do is volunteer. Like Jane said, that accreditation is volunteer. A lot of people don't know, ALOC, we volunteer. So that tells you how serious we are about making sure that the world in which our scholars live is different from the world. And knowing that what is possible, we all know it's possible to treat people with high levels of respect and dignity, to see people. And so as we push forward, as Jane said, it's for us to make sure that we are not silent, ever. ALOC, CAM, IB, ACLINT, these groups all started, but ECS is celebrating 60 years. We're celebrating 8 years. IB, I know y'all are older, so only 100 years ACLINT. So if you look at like either the history, their history of our different organizations, it all started because groups wanted something that did not exist. And so, as we're pausing at moments and taking our times to take care of ourselves, which I want to make sure is very important, to make sure we take care of ourselves in the midst of wherever we are and whatever work we're doing, and come back to community and come back to joy. So there's nothing else that I can say. I want to make sure you always remember that. But we appreciate you all, and we hope you all have a great week on purpose. And we'll see y'all next time. And come back and join the next ones. We have the team was going to come up in April, so look out for that. All right. Thank you, Meredith. Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
very
Bye.
much.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.